Hi, I'm Ayeshe, and this is part two of a conversation about spiritual abuse. In part one, I defined what spiritual abuse is. In part two, I'm asking why are women or people who speak out in religion or Tibetan Buddhism so often seen as using wrong speech or destroying the Dharma and focused on instead of actual abusers? And how can the idea of right speech or nonviolent communication be used to silence or tone police survivors of abuse and cover up abuse? So, people who speak out about gender inequality, lack of full ordination in Buddhism, training, resources, emotional support, spiritual abuse, religious abuse, gender inequality, sexual, spiritual, or financial abuse, and breaking down cultish thinking, or simply who share their experience, they shake up the status quo and they force people to examine uncomfortable emotions, disturbing truths and facts, questions, and make them question their faith and break away from psychological and spiritual groupthink and manipulation. They're basically like the child who said, "The emperor has no clothes." Facing these feelings may make people feel disturbed, unsafe, lose faith, go into depression, etc. But those feelings of discomfort and pain that come from confronting the reality of abuse are not the fault of the person sharing their experience of abuse, but they are as a result of the harm done by abusers. And therefore, the person sharing their abuse is not responsible for the feelings of the people who are uncomfortable about the truth. The person responsible for those feelings of discomfort and loss of faith are the abusers themselves. But of course, the burden of that discomfort is often placed on the person sharing their experience of abuse or simply wanting to address the abuse. So claiming that you need safe space or the experience of the victim to be delivered in a more gentle or palatable way is not what safe space is meant for. Safe space is meant to protect victims, not perpetrators. Women or people who come forward face trolling, apathy, denial, personal attacks, court cases for slander, dismissal. This is when they speak about, spiritual, physical, emotional abuse, especially in spiritual communities. They're pathologized and constantly silenced on social media platforms and in person. That silencing and denial is almost as violent as the original abuse, because as a community, we would rather silence the victim than look at how widespread the abuse is and what that means for the ideas and faith we hold about the men who lead our religions. I mean, how can these men be enlightened and still be doing these things, right? It does make you question your practice and what you've been doing with your life. And another classic kind of denial is, the person who is speaking about abuse is being dualistic. They're focusing on something very small and not important, and they should be just practicing for enlightenment. And if we just practice for enlightenment and ignore emotional and sexual abuse, the problem will go away. And I understand the inclination to just focus on one's own practice and not hold space for the abuser, because it's very messy. It's a whole net of, different people's opinions and reactions and pain. But ignoring the abuse and allowing the abuser to continue abusing is also harming the Dharma, and ultimately will lead to a decline of the Dharma and a decline of the community. And just because you're practicing an ultimate truth doesn't mean you can ignore relative reality, relative harm, and ethics. Personally, I've seen people, find no support, be sexually abused, nuns who are homeless, eating out of garbage cans due to being charged money by their Dharma center, but also working for the Dharma Center for no money and also working in some part-time job that paid minimum wage. I've seen a monk living under a stairs in a Tibetan center in Australia. I've seen nuns living in their car, living in a tent in the forest, being afraid that they were going to get raped. I've seen nuns who were forced to disrobe for the crime of full ordination in Burma, they were thrown in prison. I've seen nuns who sold their house to fund a monastery in Nepal, only to end up homeless themselves and have to go back to work in their own country and still be asked for more money. So, I've seen people. My friend was pimped by her lama to other lamas for sexual exploitation. I've had to counsel countless other women during Me Too, and I'm also a survivor of sexual abuse myself. I know how pervasive it is and how deeply, and it's deeply triggering and offensive to, be silenced in Buddhist platforms, to face slander, denial from the Buddhist community around these issues. And really, there is a kind of standard strategy that denialists employ. One is tone policing the message and asking them to, use right speech and not slander anyone, apart from standard disbelief of how could this possibly happen and how dare you say this about our precious Lama. There's a tactic used by narcissistic abusers called DAVO, which is deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. It's a manipulative tactic used by abusers, including those in domestic violence or sexual abuse situations or cults, to avoid accountability by denying wrongdoing, attacking the accuser's credibility, and casting themselves as the true victim, while portraying the actual victim as the aggressor, like you want to destroy the Dharma, you're jealous of this Lama's success, you're an angry feminist who hates men, blah, blah, blah. Effectively silencing them through confusion and blame shifting. The number 2 point is destroying their credibility, like who is your teacher? Are you fully trained? The testimonies you provide aren't my experience, like I've been ordained. It's often other women who silence women, I've been ordained as a nun for two months and my experience isn't like your experience, Number 3 is frame the abuse victim as emotionally unhinged or full of negative emotions. Number 4, frame them as a bitter minority. Number 5, suggest they want to harm the Dharma. Number 6, accuse them of trying to violate tantric vows. Quote the scripture as to why they should be silent or speak more gently, i.e. conform to ideas of feminine submissiveness and agreeability to shut them up. Number 7, frame it as a cultural misunderstanding, or portray, or number 8, portray the abuser as a victim, i.e. they're a poor traumatized refugee. They don't understand Western culture. They were taken away from their mother at 8, so they have issues with women. But none of these things excuse sexual, financial, emotional abuse or abandonment when one is supposed to be a spiritual leader, caring for those they ordain, caring for their students, at least not harming them, or they have no money, they have no country. Of course, the loss of Tibet is a tragedy, but Tibetans have been refugees for 60 years. And I'm not speaking about the standard Tibetan refugee. I'm speaking about High Lamas who actually have thousands of followers, millions of dollars, very large monasteries on the whole. Or they frame it as Chinese propaganda. Like, I can't believe this is real. This nun must not be like me, must not be a real Buddhist nun, must be supported by the Chinese and so forth, which I'm absolutely not. If I was supported by the Chinese, I wouldn't be living in an Indian slum, helping slum people for the last 17 years. So, Christian, Muslim, New Age people or cults that are abusive or toxic in nature. Obviously I'm not saying all religions are toxic, but the people that are abusive have gone through abusive communities describe, these strategies by abusers. They've gone through similar issues with patriarchal spiritual abuse and report very similar strategies. You can see this on a YouTube channel called Cults to Consciousness. And they're, like any kind of person who helps undo the cult mentality will report this kind of abuse strategies by communities to silent abuse victims.